Pat agus asach an cura húdum in tacht an seo agus loud faoi Telegael agus cúsaí croiach the creative industries. I suppose first thing maybe is to give a health warning that maybe Telegael shouldn't be held up as a model for a particular industry or as a particular company or project or whatever. Telegael is a project that originated about 21 years ago, when times, I suppose, economic times were as tough as they are now. And actually it originated from more of a policy decision taken at fairly high government level when Charlie Haughey was Taoiseach. There was a lot of unemployment problems in the country at the time, and I think the Taoiseach at the time brought the semi-state bodies together, the chief executive of the different semi-state bodies together, and gave them the task of looking at companies, looking at partnerships and maybe creating new projects as joint ventures or whatever, which would create economic activity and thereby create employment. At the time, Údarás was represented at that meeting, as was RTE by their chief executives. And Údarás, I suppose, had a long-running battle with RTE over the years that being concerned with the state of Irish language in the Gaeltacht, and particularly Irish language amongst children, one of the big criticisms levelled at RTE was that there was no programme in Irish on television for children, despite the fact that Irish was, I suppose, the #1 official language in the country at the time. And that was the case because I think in the mid-80s, I don't think there was one Irish language programme on TV for kids. And I suppose you contrast that with today, and you have a full schedule of children's programming on Coola Cahir and beyond, running on TG Cahir every day, basically, of the week. So that's, I think, how things have changed maybe in 21 years. Having said that, the aspiration was to put together some kind of a joint venture that would create activity, employment in the Gaeltacht, involving Údarás and RTE. So Údarás, being a development agency, said, look, we're in the business of helping to set up companies, etc., but we don't have any expertise in TV programming making, so RTE agreed to come on board. I think the original idea was a very, very modest, I suppose, aspiration, probably to provide an edit suite for Jim Fahey close to Galway so he could cut his news programmes and get them up to RTE at the time. And that was part of our business plan, but we also saw that particularly things happening in other countries which had similar language issues to Ireland, and Wales was an obvious example, where in fact the language amongst children was quite strong, and amongst a core group of Welsh speakers very, very strong. So we went to Wales, we had a look at what they were doing, and we saw that they were able to produce children's programmings at a reasonably economic price by taking existing series, like the Smurfs, for example, would be one, and revoicing those into Welsh, which is a process of taking the programs, writing new scripts in Welsh that are in sync with the dialogue that's spoken, and they go out then as a Welsh language program. So we saw this, and we thought this would be something we would like to bring back to Ireland. I don't know if RT were quite as ambitious as we were, so we put that as phase 2 in our plan. But I think the idea was that phase 2 would start maybe 2 months after phase 1. Those are the origins of Telegael, really. I was in Údarás at the time myself and involved in the project, and for whatever reason, some crazy reason, I decided to go with the project, give up my state job and pension and all of that. But that's how it happened. I think we started off with 2 people, myself and the guy that showed us the whole procedure and the operations in Wales turned out to be an Irish guy. And he came back and helped us set up the company with us. So it was myself and him. Des Bennett was his name. He was a technical person who had taken this technology on quite a long way. We were just entering the digital age as well, which helped with this. And then we took on our first trainee, Ender Boner, from the Donegal Gaeltacht, and now Enda is a shareholder and director of the company, and also our facilities director 21 years later. And we now employ, I think, about 55 people full-time, and we would employ maybe up to 250, 300 people at different stages of the year, depending on the productions that are happening in the company. I suppose going back through those 21 years, we actually existed pre-TG Cahir, about 6 years before TG Cahir came on stream. We did get some assistance from RTE in the early years because they were the only outlets for our programmes, so we produced 1 or 2 children's series for them, which were very, very successful and got very, very good audiences, way above anything that was anticipated at the time. So we carried on. Udros na Gaelta then saw that there may be, some additional potential in this industry, and were quite supportive in the way of training and providing training courses. We brought people like Art O'Brien from RTE and Glen Roe fame and that down to work with young people from the Gaeltacht under schemes sponsored by Udros and financed by Udros. And most of those people actually who took part in those courses in the early years are now working in the industry at different levels, some of them in Telegael and some of them in other countries, other companies I should say, and probably other countries also. Then TG Carr came along in 1996, and that created, certainly, we were in the right place at the right time for that. And I think we're probably part of the reason why TG Carr was based in the West rather than in Dublin, because I think people saw we were able to do some things in the Gaeltacht and in the West. Michael D being a minister at the time, and Maura Gagan Quinn before that, was also, I think, influential in that decision. So that was fine. The business grew as a result of TG Carr coming along. But then, I suppose, towards the end of the 90s, we realised that TG Carr wasn't going to be the big white hope we all thought it was. It was quite modestly funded for a TV broadcaster, particularly compared to, say, S4C in Wales. S4C in Wales created a whole Welsh industry, which is still quite introverted in that it tends not to look much beyond Wales because they don't have to. They have a fine big market there. But in Ireland, we quickly realised that over-reliance on TG Carr was going to be a problem for us. And at one stage we had to let go, I think, about 13 people and to look at a different strategy. At that stage then, because we were involved in revoicing animation, we had developed certain expertise and contacts. We decided to follow up on the animation side and to get involved, to make contacts overseas in Los Angeles, in France and elsewhere, and become involved in animation production from the very, very beginning. And that has been a successful strategy for us. We've now also moved into live action because a lot of the broadcasters and distributors and producers we're working with are also in live action, particularly at the children's level. And I suppose our first major live action series was a series called Afrique, which is 26 half hours of a children's drama series which we produced in 2006, 7 and 8. And which is now, even though it was produced in Gaelic, and our big objective was to give young people in Ireland a chance to watch other Irish people performing in teenage drama series. Up to then, everyone was watching, Lizzie McGuire, Malcolm in the Middle, Home and Away, watching Australians or US or UK people performing, which are fine programs, quality programs. But that was our challenge, to do something, and also then to do it in Irish, which was a double challenge because it had never been done in English, and we were trying to do something like this in Irish. And even TG Carr at the time were very, very sceptical, as number one, we would get the acting talent, and number two, we get the talent that could perform in Irish. But actually, we did. We managed to get the funding together from all various sources, including the Section 481, and also some investment from the Film Board in the early series. And TG Carr, of course. And the series was produced, and actually it won the award, the IFTA Award, which is the Irish Film and Television Award, for the best young people's programme in Ireland 3 years in a row. And that's in competition with all RTE productions and all other productions. And now the good news about Africa is starting to sell actually overseas, which we didn't envisage at all at the time. It's now sold in Spain, it's sold in the UK, in Scotland, and we've just recently done a deal in Israel as well. And we're hopeful we'll get a sale in Germany and in France later on by the end of the year. And that was something, quite honestly, we didn't envisage. We didn't make it with that purpose in mind, but we did have one requirement, and that was the production values would have to be as good as anything that the kids were watching on television at the time, or else it would be laughed out of court by people and just dismissed. And I think we achieved that. As a result of Afrique, we are now developing other teenage, when I call teenagers, probably tweenie, we call them. It's between 10, maybe 14, 15-year-old audience, with companies overseas. One we're looking at with a Japanese broadcaster, and a German broadcaster, and a UK ourselves. In fact, I was in the UK yesterday, and this is the script of it here. And the reason I brought the script along is because, essentially, if you look at that's a blank piece of paper, which we're all familiar with, but that's actually a script. And when you're going to talk to broadcasters, distributors, or whatever else, the decision is made basically on what the script is. The script is about, for a half-hour program, it's about 24 pages or whatever. But huge decisions and economic decisions are made on the basis of that script as to whether a commissioning editor will like it or not. If they like it and commission us and other people to produce 26 half hours, it could be worth €6 million in economic value, with hopefully maybe 80% of that produced in Ireland. If they don't like it, it's worth zero, the paper that it's written on. So I suppose I'm saying all of this because that wasn't the plan that we had for Telegael on day one. I think you push the boat out quite often. Our first business plan didn't work out because Jim Fahey, when I met Jim, he said, Paul, he says, I like your facilities, all of that, and I'd like to use them, but if there's a fire in Castlebar and I'm rushing back to Galway to get something out of the 6 o'clock news, I'm not going to be breaking my neck going out to Spiddle to get it cut, rushing back in and get it up to RTE. So that was our business plan, got out the window to a large extent. Again, the TG Cahir scenario, we geared up for TG Cahir, and you know, we do work for TG Cahir, and they're a very, very important customer of ours. And TG Cahir I think, would not want to see companies over-dependent on themselves either on one broadcaster, as would RTE. So I think it's very important for companies that they do look, take a broader view of the market. In one way, I always look back at that time and think it was a godsend for us because it made us look overseas. And we probably wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't do it at the time. And I know I was even in London the last couple of days talking to UK production companies and explaining how co-productions work and what we could in Telegael in Ireland bring to a co-production arrangement. And a co-production basically is where you might have 3 or 4 companies working on a series together. In animation, for example, you might do the writing and the design work in the US. You'll do probably the animation in India or China or somewhere in Asia. And we would do maybe the voice recording, maybe some scripting, and all the post-production and bring the whole program together, quality control, all of that. So, and that helps to finance the series because animation, like all television program, is very, very expensive to produce. But the upside of that is then we own the series between us. Previously, broadcasters, for example, the BBC or ITV in the UK would have financed the series 100% themselves, and they would own the rights at the end of the day. That is not happening anymore now. The BBC might put 60, 70% of the budget or make it available to a UK broadcaster and tell them to go raise the balance of the funding somewhere else. And that's created an opportunity for us, not only in Telegael but in Ireland, because we have tax incentives in Ireland that apply to TV, whereas the ones in the UK don't, they apply to film only. And that's why you have now co-productions like Single-Handed with RTE and ITV, Father and Son is another example. But hopefully that business will grow over the coming years. So that's I suppose, a background to what the company is. The original shareholders were RTE and Uda Ross and myself at the time. And since then now, the management has bought out quite a lot of the other equity in the company, and those are all people, most of them were with the company from day one, and most of them are locally based people who have brought the company to where it is. So I'd just like to show you maybe an example of some of the work that we do. A lot of this is animation based. In the future we would see maybe becoming more 50-50 animation and live action. And just one other point to mention at this time. In the early 90s, Roger Corman, who some of you may be familiar with, he's a famous American movie producer, a B-movie they call it. It's films for TV, video distribution, and not the prime market, maybe a secondary market. He came to Ireland and set up a studio in Ballynahown in Galway. And he was quite prolific in producing maybe 7 or 8 films a year from those studios. And Roger is notorious for paying people very, very little, allowing them to work on his films. But in another way, that has given people like Jack Nicholson and people like that who've gone on to bigger things an opportunity to get into the business. And he did that also here in Ireland. And a lot of people actually trained with him in the studios. And some of those people who trained Roger Corman are now working with us also. But he decided, Roger's now in his 80s, and he has kind of pulled back a bit, and the studios were going to be sold. So with the help of Uderos and the banks and whatever, we decided to buy the studios to keep them in the industry, because we had hired the studios from Corman for the first series of Afrik, and we saw the value that they had in terms of space, the sound stages, dressing rooms, catering facilities, all of that. So they're a very good resource to have in the area. So maybe just to give you a little glimpse of some of the work that we've done over the last while. A lot of it is animation, and that would be co-produced with other companies, whether they're US, France, Germany, or whatever. A number we've co-produced with other Irish companies. Skunk Fu is a good example of that. It's a property that was created by a small Kilkenny-based cartoon studio called Cartoon Saloon. And it's called Skunk Fu, and it is broadcast in Irish on TG4, but it's broadcast in the UK, Super RTL in Germany, and I think in about 125 countries around the world now at this stage. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that we may be able to get into a second series of that. So maybe if I press the right button here, I can get this to work. That's just a sample of some of the work that we've done over the years. I suppose it's basically about 2,000 that we've got involved in the co-production area. And that's brought us into a different kind of a level, because you have to finance, not only do you have to produce and get involved in the co-production arrangement, but they're very, very complex arrangements, and you could, with co-production agreements, distribution agreements, and of course you need bank and other finance to do all of that as well. So while we're talking about creative industries, they're still very much industries and still very much a business. And I think all businesses need development, production, finance, sales, marketing, human relations, all of that element. And development in our business is very, very important. And I must say quite expensive as well. At the moment, what we're working on is a number of animation series, developing some live action projects. I think we have about 3 in development at the moment, one of which Super RTL in Germany is coming on board to produce a pilot with us. And the other project we have going on board at the moment is it's based in the studios, and it's a puppet series for the BBC, which is a co-production between ourselves and a UK-based company. Again, they managed to get about 60% of the budget for the series from their own resources and from the BBC. And it'll be broadcast on CBBC in the spring of next year. It's a puppet series called Zoo Factor. I have a little clip of it here. It's rough and ready because it's not complete, and I just took this out of the edit suite this morning, so it's not graded or anything like that, and it has got the proper music in it. But we'll give you a glimpse of it. It's based on Zoo Factor, but with animals performing the different roles. That's it. Yeah, that's it. So it's very rough and ready. It's actually been shot at the moment, so that's a very rough piece that I just brought in. It has to be refined a lot. That's a co-production between ourselves and a company in Wales, and it's part of BBC. The BBC will get a license for the UK for that series, and that's what they're paying for. But then if it sells anywhere outside of the UK, ourselves and the Welsh company will participate in any profits that it makes outside of that. And that's, I suppose, the model that we have to operate. It's quite different to some other companies here in Ireland who will bring in productions, arrange the financing and things like that for them. But then very little is left in Ireland apart from obviously the employment and the money, which are very, very important, and the training and all of that. But in our case also, our objective is to retain some of the intellectual property, some of the ownership of the series. And animation particularly, and puppets like that can be, the big advantage is they can be revoiced into any language around the world. They tend to be reasonably culturally neutral. I mean, we're hearing there Irish accents, exaggerated Irish accents, Welsh accents, Australian, US and all that. They can be all changed, and the broadcaster, whether it be in Germany or France or wherever, can add their own little idiosyncrasies to that. Whereas live action production is quite different.